Hello and welcome to the home of the Ghost Owl, and continuing with some things from Warhammer The Old World. Now I am recording this video in advance, but it comes out on Sunday, so hopefully yesterday all the books and everything came out and I actually managed to get hold of my copy, so fingers crossed for that. And of course, even if I do manage to get hold of my copy on yesterday, as when this video is released, I still need time to read through everything and start preparing videos based upon that. So in the meantime, something that's come to my attention is a lot of players that are potentially new to certainly Warhammer Fantasy. They weren't involved before. They're interested in it now. They've probably come from 40k or even other game systems where they are only used to a certain type of material, so they're only used to plastic, let's say. So I just thought I'd just do a quick video based upon my personal experience of working with these materials. And then in terms of aftercare, we're thinking about how we're going to be storing and carrying the miniatures around. And again, based upon some extensive recent experience, given that I am currently packing up 30 years worth of collection to ship across the Atlantic to my new home. So without further ado, let's jump in. So the first material out there is the classic metal. There was a time when pretty much all the miniatures were metal. So this is the white metal that replaced the lead back in the day, and we're actually seeing Games Workshop have re-released metal miniatures to get away from their Finecast. Finecast completely gone. They're actually re-releasing, as part of the old world, metal miniatures. So just a few of the some sort of top tips. So metal miniatures preparation, as with any miniature, but preparation is key. I always wash my metal miniatures. I use just basic washing up liquid with some lukewarm water and a bit of a toothbrush just to give it all a clean out, to make sure that any residues or anything that's been left on, mold release agent, anything basically is completely cleaned off. And I'd say I do that with pretty much everything, but I definitely think it's worthwhile to do. Certainly in the past, I've seen some quite prominent mold lines and also flashing. The flashing tends to be these sort of little spiky bits that come off from the mold. Obviously, they will need trimming. Mold lines need filing, and certainly of the three materials, the metal is the hardest to file. But with a decent set of sort of small modelling files, which you can pick up anywhere. You don't have to get them from Games Workshop. In fact, I strongly recommend you don't. You can get them from anywhere, from Amazon to a local hobby store or something like that, for a fraction of the price, and to be just as good, if not better quality. So yeah, get some small files, and it is worth getting a selection, one that is round in shape, one that is flat. The round in shape helps you get into certain areas that the flat one might not necessarily be able to. So do clean up those mold lines and do trim off the little flashing spiky bits. Now, a lot of the metal miniatures have these slotter bases. Now, you can see that here in this image. Now, that's actually a plastic horse, but a lot of the metal ones on foot have these tabs at the bottom that should slot into a base. Now, interesting, when I looked at Games Workshop's bases, they were on their web store, none of them had the slots in. Now, of course, you would have an option, it's only plastic, to cut the slot in, or you can trim the tab off the bottom. Though, interestingly, that tab that was originally there actually gave a lot of support to the miniature on the base. So without it, you have to consider how the feet are actually positioned, as to how well they will stand up, how strong they will be when connected to the base, due to often quite a small amount of surface area. So if you trim the tab off, which to be honest, I'm not sure I recommend doing that. If you are going to do that, maybe you're going to put some stuff around it to give it more support. But if you are trimming the tab off, you're definitely going to have to file underneath to make at least a flat enough surface for some contact. Personally, in my case, I would be looking to actually cut some slots into the plastic base, because I think it makes for a much better, stronger connection with the miniature and the bases. In terms of metal, super glue is the glue, and personally I use a Gorilla Glue. I source it on Amazon or a local hobby store, whichever one ends up cheaper when I need it. But yeah, you can pretty much use anything, and again, generally don't recommend the Games Workshop super glue. I'm sure plenty of people use it and it works perfectly fine. I've had better results with others. I also particularly do like the gel style of super glue as well. It's less runny, but you just have to make sure that you're only putting very, very small amounts on, because the gel, when you actually push the joints or the two surfaces together, will of course spread out, and you've either got to clean it up afterwards so you don't get super glue everywhere, or you just make sure you don't put too much on there. But the gel can work pretty well, so it doesn't run everywhere. Now, if you've got particularly large pieces of metal, it's thoroughly recommended that you pin it. I'm not going to go through a detailed description of doing that. There's loads of videos on YouTube about pinning, but essentially it's drilling 2 holes, one in each surface or more depending on the size of the surface. You put some type of rod in those holes as you join it together, and essentially it creates an extra strong joint. Things like paper clips and so on can be used as the rods, depending how big the hole you need. But I say there's plenty of videos on how to do this on YouTube, so I'm not going to replicate those. Go check them out. But if you do have large pieces that you're struggling to glue together, or you think could do with some extra strength, pinning will definitely help that. In terms of the metal miniatures, they're the heaviest of all the materials. So, obviously consider that when you're putting things in a carry case, or even if you're using a cardboard box. Sometimes, if it's heavy enough, it could break the bottom of the box, that sort of thing. So they can be quite heavy. A lot of people like that weight. To be fair, that's it's all personal preference, but a lot of people do like the weight of those heavy metal miniatures. However, they can also be top heavy if they've got metal banners or they're quite big on the top. You put them on any type of slope and they'll be tipping over. You can see here in the picture on the right hand side, with the Grail Knights, you've actually got metal miniatures on top of the plastic. Now, if you look at the centre of gravity, that weight versus the plastic does make those Grail Knights quite top heavy as well. So again, any type of slope, any type of tipping, and they will be falling over. So definitely something to bear in mind there. Now, in terms of if you are unlucky enough to drop one, the overall miniature generally is pretty robust. You tend to find that a lot of things will bend rather than break, though joints with the super glue, because of the weight of the miniature, you will often find that joints where they're super glued together, arms and so on, are likely to break off and would have to be re-glued. With the bends, if it's bending, sort of something like this crest, that's not too bad to put it back. But when you have long things like this lance or staffs or something like that, it's really hard to straighten out. And you can see here, even on this picture, you can see how the lance has bends in it and it kinks. It's really hard to get that back fully straight so that it's not visible. You can use 2 pieces of material like lolly sticks and things, two lolly sticks, ice cream sticks, to squish it together and try and straighten out as much as possible. But it is difficult. So just be aware on certainly items like that for bends can be quite difficult to get back in a fully straight way. So that's metal. It's not a terrible thing to work with. Personally, it's my least favourite out of the 3 materials. I agree that I do like it. It's nice to hold it. It's nice to have that weight. But in terms of working with, playing with, carrying these miniatures, the metal is my least favourite of the 3. But it's 10 times better than the fine cast, which is no longer available and we won't be covering in this article. So moving on, we have Forge World Resin. I have plenty of experience with this in 40k, with everything from Drukari Tantalus to Dreadnoughts to sort of Deathcore of Krieg stuff and all sorts. So lots of experience with Forge World Resin. They do provide in the box, actually, while the instructions can sometimes be a bit hit and miss about how you build it, they do provide some pretty good material preparation instructions, and in there again, wash every single component. And I would say this is probably the most critical material to do this, because it can actually, there's a mold release agent that remains on the resin that can make it, when you paint it, can make it peel off and stuff. So thoroughly recommend giving it a good wash, and again, washing up liquid, just some cheap washing up liquid, some lukewarm water, and get yourself a toothbrush. That toothbrush is key to getting in all those nooks and crannies, getting that mold release agent out. There's generally quite a lot of tidying up to do. I would say that Forge World Resin has the most tidying up to do when it comes to mold lines and flashing. There's generally quite a lot of flashing that has to be trimmed out, filed down, and the same with mold lines. So, you know, the image you can see here, taken from the Games Workshop website, you can see has already had a lot of that work done. It'd be interesting to see how these guys are coming out of the box when you open it. But yeah, there's generally a lot of preparation time, and definitely worth taking that time to do the preparation. You'll feel it in spades later on. Also bends, you can get sort of slight warped bends, particularly again in these longer thin components. However, and I've had it, like for example with when I had a Derrideo Dreadnought, I've got some long guns coming off the arms that were bent. Generally quite easy to rectify. You know, get it in some not really boiling water, but some reasonably hot water, and when you soak it in there enough, you can actually bend it back and take it out and let it cool down, or even put cold water over it, and it will pretty much stay nice and straight. So much easier, and you can get it generally pretty straight afterwards. So easier than the metal to deal with. Relatively easy to file, though you will get a lot of resin dust everywhere, just something to take into account. Obviously, you get dust with any type of filing, but the resin dust just does seem to get everywhere depending on how much you're filing. And again, in terms of the glue that you're using for these, it's going to be super glue. Again, I use the Gorilla Glue from Amazon. So, you know, for your metal and your Forge World resin, that super glue is what is needed. Again, if you've got large pieces, and I haven't seen anything yet for Tau that is big enough that I would be thinking about pinning, but I've yet to have any of those miniatures as well to see how they fit together. But certainly large pieces, and when I've put vehicles together, for example, you know, have absolutely needed pinning to ensure that you get that best possible strong join that's needed. They're generally heavier. And reasonably heavy. You know, when I look at some of the vehicles I've got with that resin, it's pretty solid. They're generally reasonably heavy compared to plastic, but they're not as heavy as metal. And I generally find that they overall are a little bit more balanced because the weight is not quite as heavy as that metal. So I haven't found really too many issues with anything being top heavy in the Forge World resin stuff and resin range. Like I say, I haven't got these Tau models that you see here quite yet, but my experience with Forge World resin so far has been pretty good. One thing to note is if you do drop it, they can be quite brittle. The resin doesn't take to flexing very well. It will snap. You don't have to bend it much, and it will just snap. You drop it, it will snap, and also chipping as well. There's enough weight there that when you drop it, you're going to feel it. So of the thing I would want to drop the least, it would be Forge World resin. Plastic light enough that it tends to sort of bounce without too much damage most of the time, and the metal ones tend to be more solid, a lot less components overall. So yeah, Forge World resin would be the one that I'd be the most concerned if I dropped it. Okay, so that covers the resin. And again, there's lots of more in-depth guides on preparation and videos on YouTube, so I recommend checking those out. This is essentially it's supposed to be a quick look through what is out there. It's all usable and easy to work with. Not to be, if you've only ever used plastic, don't be out there going, oh my god, what am I going to do? It's metal, is it resin? I don't want to buy those models. This is just a quick look to show that it's absolutely possible, but there are some things to bear in mind. In terms of Games Workshop plastic, and yes, there are many other companies out there, and you will have seen on the video that came out yesterday where we're looking at other companies that provide miniatures in the fantasy world, and they use different types of plastics as well as metal, and you've also got 3D print resin and all sorts in there. Look, with GW plastics, which is what we're focusing on here, again, I still wash a sprue. I will wash it, put it in washing up liquid, toothbrush, just to get anything off it. I recommend doing that with any material. It doesn't hurt the material. Just don't make sure the water's just lukewarm. It's not too hot. And I always recommend doing that with the miniatures, and then make sure it does dry off pretty quickly. Mold lines, you don't tend to get the flashing, but you do get the mold lines. I have to say, with the more modern plastics, GW have been much better about hiding those mold lines with joints or under cloaks and things like that. They still are there in a lot of cases, and certainly with these older plastics, there will generally be plenty of mold lines there. So make sure you've got a file to file those off. They will stick out so much. I know a lot of people, they don't do the work, and that's fine if you're happy with that, but I'm not a mold line crazy person on it, but that preparation is key, and when you start painting, those mold lines will stick out and you'll probably regret not filing them off. Generally, I don't find too many bending issues with plastic. It's generally quite flexible overall. You can bend it a reasonable way, even things like aerials and things on vehicles, for example. Haven't had any issues with lances and so on. You can bend it to a point, but like anything, if you bend it too far, it will break. But that flexibility does stand it in good stead for being moved around. Very easy to file. The plastic itself is very soft, and in the case of gluing, like a lot of other, all plastic miniatures, whether it's building model kits of tanks and ships to Games Workshop miniatures and others, poly cement is what you use. I personally like Humbrol, which I get from Amazon, but there are many types out there. And again, like a lot of this, I actually don't recommend Games Workshop's hobby supplies and glue. I think of all the things, I really like Games Workshop miniatures in a lot of cases, though I do buy others. I generally find Games Workshop's hobby supplies to be overpriced, and also in a lot of cases not as good quality. I've had many issues with Games Workshop's poly cement in the past, and then we're talking a few years ago because I changed, not creating good joints. Whereas I found the Humbrol to be absolutely excellent, and miniatures that have been made with that Humbrol have lasted for ages, whereas the ones made with Games Workshop, like these Tomb King skeletons here, which I had before, they were originally made with Games Workshop's poly cement, and I found that over time the arms started breaking off and all sorts. It almost felt like it was a brittle joint, whereas the Humbrol has been much more reliable. Pinning, generally not required in plastic. Even big plastic models, I haven't required to pin anything. And I have to say the more modern kit's pretty good. We're not getting that many more modern kits, but even the older plastics, I've not seen anything there that I would consider even pinning in plastic. Generally pretty lightweight overall, which makes them easy to carry and move around, and on falls it's minimum damage. You might, if you get an unlucky land or an unlucky bounce, small thin items or small joints might break. So on skeletons in particular, you tend to find things like these arms at the shoulder joint, which is like a ball and socket joint. You've got the waist joint here, which is basically two flat areas. That's an often one to go, as is the head and neck, which is almost kind of like kind of like a ball and socket joint, but there's not much of a ball on the end. It's quite flat. So those joints in particular is where it will often break if you drop them. But, things like spikes, if you've got a Chaos Army or something like that, it's got spikes on it, or stuff like that, if it's thin like that, it will break. But overall, most miniatures generally survive a fall or two. So overall, at the three materials, yes, I prefer plastic. There's no doubt. It doesn't have the weight, which is nice. Don't get me wrong. And I say this is my own personal opinion. There are plenty of people out there that will say, no, Forge World resin is the best. The details and everything you get with resin is the best. And there are others that will say, I love metal miniatures. I've always loved metal miniatures. And that's absolutely fine. Absolutely fine. Personally, I like working with GW plastic, but it's all good to work with. I own metal miniatures. I own a giant metal forest dragon, which is the bane of my life, and that did require pinning. And I have, say, a whole bunch of Forge World resin stuff, and it's all absolutely viable, and I'm happy to purchase all of it and work with it. But plastic is my favourite, without a doubt. Okay, so we've taken a look briefly at the three materials that you'll get from Games Workshop. Say other suppliers are available, there will be other materials available, but we're just covering what's on GW, or we could be here for a very long time. And now it's about storage and carrying. So there are options. You're on a budget. You spend all your money on miniatures, but now you need to carry them around, right? You don't actually have much money left. What options are there? Well, if you're working on a tight budget, shoe boxes, small Amazon boxes are always really good. If you've got some sort of bigger miniatures in there, even the smaller ones, I do recommend using a large packing peanuts. If you use the small ones, one, they get everywhere, two, they get clogged up in the model itself. I actually tend to find that the large packing peanuts, like the ones in the middle here at the top, they look like it's like Cheesy Puffs or Wotsits or something. They work really well. I don't like the large packing peanuts that you see here. They're kind of like an S-bend packing peanuts. The issue I have with these is they kind of hook onto the models, and it's a real pain. So I tend to find these are much better and cause less issues when getting your models in and out without getting hooked up and everything else. So, shoe boxes, small Amazon cardboard boxes with a bunch of these packing peanuts, pretty good. If you've got a little bit more money to spend, you could go with something like these sort of cheap storage boxes, fishing tackle boxes, for example. Lots of spaces for bits and things as well. But they have, there's lots of different versions of these out there. You can search for them. But, does offer a potentially much cheaper way of being able to carry these miniatures around. You've just spent all that time preparing it, building it, painting it. The last thing you want to be doing is carrying a whole armful of these things around, dropping them, clashing them together. You do need to look after them, and there are ways and means of doing that without breaking the bank. One thing I do recommend, though, with all of the options we're going to talk about here, is I really like matte varnish afterwards. So once you've painted your miniature, especially if you're using contrast paints are particularly bad for this, rubbing off when handled even with fingers. But certainly if they're in contact with whether it's foam, whether it's packing peanuts, sides of boxes, whatever, the contrast paints will damage, chip, rub off, and so the matte varnish will stop that. But I recommend doing that with all painted miniatures. It just gives it an added layer of durability. Metal miniatures in particular, again, chip quite a lot just because of the weight of them. So if you've got a bunch of them in a box and they're moving around, just the weight of them can cause a lot of chipping on them. So it's an easy thing to do. It's a quick thing to do, and it just really helps get the most durability out of the paint job you can. It's not going to stop everything, but it does significantly help. Again, with a matte varnish, there are lots of different suppliers available for this, and I'd probably say, and they're all pretty similar. Everyone's got their own favourite brand, but they're all pretty similar. And even matte varnishes, which are not in hobby specific, so it's not Army Painter, it's not GW, but there are other ones out there for all sorts of applications in hardware stores and so on. Can all be good. Obviously, do your due diligence beforehand and see reviews on things, but there are cheaper, better alternatives available out there than Games Workshop in that regard. So moving on, though, if you've got a little bit more money to spend and you want some generic miniature storage, now I have gone to KR Multicase and Battle Foam. I am not going to cover the GW cases with that zigzag foam stuff in it. I just hate it. I really don't like it. I've just been packing up 30 years worth of miniatures. I've got 2 of those big Crusade boxes they had with the zigzag foam. I just don't like it. It is an option. I'm sure there are people out there that love it to death. I don't, and I'm not going to cover it here. But I also do have plenty of KR Multicase and Battle Foam products. So those are 2. There are many others out there available. These aren't the only 2, but I'm talking about these because I've got personal experience and can personally recommend both of them for some of their offerings. When it comes to generic miniature storage, what you're looking at, though, is essentially a bunch of generic sized holes. They're not specifically cut for the miniatures or specifically designed for the miniatures in here. You're basically just putting them in these rectangular holes. Now, it's a good option in a lot of cases. Again, it's kind of, this is like a mid-range option, I would say, because you've got some decent foam in there. They are designed for miniatures. They do cost a bit more than your shoebox and packing peanuts. The only thing I find with them, particularly for the infantry, is when you've got all these different base sizes, these are uniform cuts. So when if you've got a 30mm base size, 25mm base size, 20mm base size, and you've got all these different base sizes that go in there, it can make it quite a challenge. You're like, yeah, okay, you can get all of one unit in, but when you start wanting to put 2 units in there that have got different base sizes, if you have it for the biggest unit, the little one will rattle around a little bit, or if you have it for the little one, the bigger one gets squashed in there. The other thing is, these aren't very good. I found when you've got miniatures which have a difference between, if you're holding a sword and shield, it's generally, he fits in pretty nicely. But if you've got like a spear or a halberd, standard bearers in particular, they just don't fit in these holes, and generally they're like sticking over the top. You can manage it, you can pack them and still work with it, but it can be an issue. More dynamic miniatures, I found witch elves, for example, a bit of a pain getting in here. Because of their dynamic poses. They've got a lot of sort of sharp, spiky bits that get hung up in the foam, which when you're getting them in and out, there's a risk of obviously catching and pulling and so on. So they're okay. They're a good mid-range option. But just bear in mind, I tend to find, certainly, you can see here, there's a lot of space. This thing's going to be rattling around in there because it's not cut to it, right? So things are going to be rattling around a little bit. Now, it's surrounded by a foam wall, right? It's probably not going to come to any harm, but it is rattling around. And in these ones, with the infantry, can be quite a challenge just to ensure you've got your very varied army fitting in these slots. One thing you can do, though, if you do have the option, if you do have a standard bearer, for example, you could cut this out. Of course, once you've done that, that's only ever going to be for like a standard bearer, but there are options. You just take a pair of clippers and you can trim these to suit as you like as well. But going to the most expensive type of foam trays out there. Now, these are the custom cut ones. KR, Multicase and Battle Foam both do this. And to be honest, this is like the pinnacle, but also comes at the biggest cost. But, they really, really do look after your miniatures well. I've got custom cut stuff for Star Wars X-Wing, for example, and a few other things. Aeronautica Imperialis, in fact, I've got is also custom cut foam. But it is expensive, so I can't put 30 years worth of collection in it right now. But you can see here, here's one with a screaming bell in it. Works incredibly well. You've obviously got the warp lightning cannon thing that can fit in here as well. So, it fits incredibly well. It doesn't rattle around too much. Great for bigger miniatures, but good for the smaller ones too. You can actually get your whole collection done in custom cut foam. This one here, so that's a Battle Foam one. This is a KR Multicase one, and that's for a Terrorgeist. So if you've got vampire counts and anyone that's seen a Terrorgeist, you'll know how it kind of a weird shape. But this one, a Terrorgeist, will fit in there. You can see it fits in very nicely indeed. So custom cut is the pinnacle. It's the best way of storage. Comes at the biggest cost, and those costs, when you start adding tray after tray, rack up. But you don't always, some of these trays are pre-made. So you'll get it with like it can take X, Y, and Z miniatures. But you also have the option to totally build this yourself and configure this yourself. So for my X-Wing ones, there's a template and a tool on the website. You just put it up and you go, right, I want this miniature here, and they'll custom cut not only for the shape of the miniature, but exactly the miniatures you want. Of course, the downside of that is flexibility, so that if you do change your army, it might not fit with those trays. Now, of course, you can just buy extra foam rather than extra cases to keep things in and just trade one tray out for another, but just bear in mind that the one downside to custom cut is that when rules change, when points cost change, your army changes, it doesn't necessarily fit. So if you're just going, so I want a case just for a 2,000 point army, that could be a problem if it only fits that army, right? So just bear that in mind. And then finally, looking at the different cases and bag options out there, by far the cheapest options are the cardboard ones. Here's a KR multi-case one. I actually own a whole ton of these. They're great for storage. The same with these battle foam ones, great for storage, cheap. This one comes with like a carrying handle, so you can carry it around as well. This one not so much. So it does have holes in the side, but not that easy to move around. Much better for storage. Though bear in mind, it's cardboard. And it's pretty durable cardboard. Like I say, I own both of these cardboard boxes, the Battle Foam and the KR Multicase, but don't put them in any outbuildings where it's damper air, for example. They really need to be indoors. Like I say, it's pretty durable cardboard, but over time they degrade. So I thoroughly recommend, if you're going down that route for storage, keeping them indoors. But good options, cheap options, or certainly the cheapest of the bunch options for those storage. Now, if you do go down the KR multi-case route with these little cardboard ones, you can actually get cases to put them in as well, which can be quite nice. So you can actually store it like this, and then when you're going somewhere to an event or whatever, or just to your local gaming club, you can actually just take one off the shelf and put it in here, which is very nice. You can see here lots of different options. You've got pockets as well for things like cards, notepad, pens, dice, all that sort of thing. And nice shoulder straps, pretty good. Of course, as you start to get onto these other options, and these are some of the battle foam options here, it gets more and more expensive. But you do get what you pay for. I can thoroughly recommend both of these companies. I have a number of products from them. Like I say, there are other companies out there available. These aren't the only ones. Being clear on that, there are many, many other places to go, but I own these, so I can talk about them in person, and their quality has been excellent. The delivery has been excellent, so I have zero complaints with either of these companies, and that's why I recommend them, and I'm certainly not paid to do so. Final option here with the KR multi-case, you can actually go down a metal case. I don't like these personally. I don't like the metal cases. I find them heavy and unwieldy. Yes, they're definitely the strongest option, but not for me. Sure, some people like them. I prefer these sort of ballistic nylon style cases, luggage style cases. I tend to think these work the best, offer a good combination of durability and weight and flexibility, and often I love having all these extra pockets to put things like books, notepads, cards, that sort of thing, particularly if I've created my own unit cards, for example, because I don't want to have a whole book out all the time. So sometimes I'll actually create my own unit cards, which I'll then be able to put out on the table and use those to refer to. So I prefer these, but this is definitely available. And then if you want to go for like a much bigger storage option, here's an example here from Battle Foam. You can see the size of this thing. Big old storage, comes with a handle and wheels. Very rare that you're going to need to take anything this big to an event, but does offer a really good storage opportunity. They're pretty much done in such a way they can also be stacked. It's an expensive way of doing it, without a doubt. You've got, the cardboard way is actually pretty good if you want cheap storage, but this is an option too. All right, this is an option too, and I think it's important to see them all and then to fit in with people's budget. Everybody's budget is different. My ideal place to be, but I can't afford to do it for everything I own, is this sort of thing, or this sort of thing, where you've got pretty decent sized case with custom cut trays. Right, that would be my perfect pinnacle. In reality, I end up with a few of these over time. Bear in mind, I've been collecting for a very long time, but I end up with a few of these over time, and the bulk of my storage is sort of these cardboard things with generic trays in, And in many cases as well, certainly with larger models, it's a box with packing peanuts, right? So, I use all the methods we've talked about because that's generally what you need to do, because, that's what I can afford. But hopefully that's helped a bunch of you out there when you're sort of getting into the old world and you're being faced with, holy crap, there's metal, there's Forge World resin, and there's plastic. And then after you've done all of that work and you've built and painted it, it's like, okay, now I've got to move it around. What options are there out there? If you've been into war games before, then you'd be familiar with all of this, but this is very much done for those of you that are coming into it either pretty fresh. Maybe you've been a total Warhammer player and you've decided, you know what, I really enjoyed the video game and I actually want to play the tabletop game. Well, hopefully this helped you. Thanks for watching. If it did help you, if people enjoyed this, please give it a thumbs up. And, but if you didn't, give it a thumbs down. But I want to know why in the comments down below. Let me know what you didn't like about it. I can't improve my content unless you tell me what you didn't like. So that feedback is important for me, and it is welcome because that's how I want to improve, which is good quality content for you all to enjoy. If you want to see more content, however, please hit that subscribe button. It's totally free for you to do. It's a big deal for me, so thank you for that in advance. You've been watching The Ghost Owl, and I'll see you all very soon.